Sandra Jackson-Dumont is a rock star in the Seattle art world. She was wooed here from New York to take on a huge challenge: how to inspire a lifelong relationship with art, especially among young people. She arrived in the Pacific Northwest with a bang in 2006, throwing massive parties at the Seattle Art Museum as its Director of Education and Outreach. Today, she has been recognized as one of the city's most influential for her groundbreaking work. Yet, how does Sandra Jackson-Dumont inspire interest in an in-person visit to a museum when we think we get all we need through a screen? And what does it mean to curate in this age of readily available content? I'm Hanson Hossein. Welcome to Four Peaks. Sandra, welcome.
Thank you.
So, Deputy Director of Education and Public Programs, that's a pretty weighty title. What do you tell your family that you do?
I work in museums. That's what I tell them I do. I tell them that I curate experiences, which means that I think about how people and objects and issues that are in the world come together in a space to erupt dialogue.
So that sounds great, and museums have always been such an important part of our society, our city. How has that job changed from, say, 20 years ago to now? What are your challenges that you face normally?
Actually, my job, how it's structured, is kind of an abnormality. It actually, most people that are in education really are thinking about, okay, we're going to do a lecture, or we're going to do a public program that brings in kids or school groups. At least that's how the public thinks of it. And the way that we've chosen to think about this particular job is thinking about how people intersect with each other. And so the whole field has changed a great deal, because museums are thinking less about themselves as being kind of purveyors of knowledge and more as kind of contributors to conversations.
Well, that's interesting. I'm just going to play a bit of video from SAM, Seattle Art Museum, so we can see what it looks like. Because people who haven't been to a museum for a while might think that it's a stodgy place that, you know, is dusty and doesn't really necessarily sort of allow conversations to happen. But it sounds to me that you and the people you work with really want it to be a place where people connect.
Yeah.
Like a library almost, right? Or a public space.
Well, I mean, museums are public spaces, and yes, kind of like libraries, but not in the traditional sense of a library where you go and you're quiet and you sit and you read or you surf the internet. One where actually it could be loud and people can experience the range of emotions. So you can have a situation where people are quiet and reflective and having a small intimate dialogue, or they can, you know, be dancing in the galleries in response to music that's being played that is connected to an exhibition that's on view. And so there's a full range of experiences, things that are connected to social justice issues. Why are museums not caring about water issues when we have collections around Asian art, Haitian art, all these different kind of cultures that have been impacted and are kind of climate refugees. So SAM is very much invested in that.
So this idea of music and dancing in a museum, it's like, oh my gosh, that's not what we learned in grade school about how we behave in places like that. How do we give ourselves permission to actually enjoy an institution like that in a different way?
I think that institutions can create kind of a platform and or a point of entry and or a social comfort zone for people to understand just by being in the space that they can behave this way. It's kind of like you kind of know how to behave when you go to an arcade. You kind of know how to behave when you go to that club that you love. You know, you kind of actually have perceptions about what's happening inside if there's a line outside. If you can't get in, people are kind of like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I missed whatever that was happening inside. So you kind of pull from what people know in the world as being triggers for them to help them understand that things are interesting, and you create those same situations in a place like a museum.
So speaking of clubs and lines, what you're very famous for is creating this remix event at SAM on a regular basis where people will line up around the block. I mean, 3,000 people will come to a party at the museum. Where'd you get that idea?
Well, first of all, I shouldn't take credit for it myself. There's a lot of people that have been invested at SAM in doing this work, and I think that's actually one of the key aspects of making it successful. It's not just one group's responsibility, it's the entire institution's responsibility for the success of it. So if it succeeds, everyone succeeds. If it fails, we all fail, and we believe in failing upward. I got the idea because museums have either gone from being really reflective, kind of critical places where people are highly intellectual, you're super smart, and or it's been on the other extreme where they're throwing a party and there's no one's looking at the art. It's just the museum is a capsule for people to do whatever they would do somewhere else.
It's ambient noise.
It's ambient noise. The objects are ambient. The history is ambient. And so we started talking about, so when I lived in New York and worked in New York, we had something at the Studio Museum called Uptown Fridays. The Brooklyn Museum has their events. Other institutions have their events. And what we noticed there was that people wanted to actually have conversations. So, but they also wanted to have a conversation, have a drink, and then go out and dance, and then do it again 20 minutes later. So when I came to SAM, I was just like, well, Seattle is known for music. So why are we not capitalizing on it? Seattle is also known for literature, and it's also becoming known for dance, and certainly the collecting and visual art community here is pretty amazing.
So how did your colleagues take this crazy, bold idea?
I don't think they saw it as crazy. I think they saw it as being like really an interesting way for them to have fun at work. And then there were other people who were kind of like, well, you know, maybe we need to think about how we can control this part of it and maybe not control this part. So we actually talked about letting our hair down and really based all of it on research. And so it's not just, oh, Sandra wants to throw this party and it's awesome and she wants to bring a piece of New York to Seattle. That's really wasn't what it was about. It was really more about basing it on research, how people behave. Like we looked at a lot of psychographic research and things like that. Things that people don't know happen at museums, but we did it.
Well,
and
you know, when we come back, I actually want to go deeper into this idea of fun and conversation and control, because I think that's really important. So when we return with Sandra Jackson-Dumont, we'll find out what it takes to keep folks coming back long after the party's over. We're back with museum impresario Sandra Jackson-Dumont from the Seattle Art Museum. Sandra, you were just talking about throwing a party at SAM, having that engagement, having that conversation, tying into the community. That's terrific, especially for folks who can come to these parties in the evenings. When it comes to actually engaging kids, when they have so many choices now when it comes to media and what catches their attention, how do you deal with that?
Well, there are a host of different ways that we can engage young people, or that we do engage young people. And it's also, I think sometimes people forget that young people are super busy, and there's that they age from like being toddlers to smaller people to tweens to adolescents, and then adults, and so then they are oftentimes pigeonholed into one group. So we sometimes throw parties or throw events at museums that are supposed to address everyone, teens and their 2-year-old sister.
That must be hard, because the generational divide is actually there based on technological use, cultural sort of sensibilities.
Absolutely. And so for teens, as an example, they throw their own version of Remix and they curate the entire experience. It's called Teen Night Out.
So they do it themselves?
They do it themselves, and we train them over the course of a year, and they produce 2 of those events. One is produced by alumni, and it's our teen arts group. They're called TAG. And they actually develop all aspects of the program. They pick the talent, they connect the talent to exhibitions, they have to have thematic tie-ins, they give their own tours, they learn how to give tours. It's not just kind of like, oh, this is what I think only, but they're highly opinionated tours. They're kind of like their favorite things that they want to talk about, but the challenge with them is to connect whatever their tour is about to something that teens and young people are invested in. And also there's a change component. What exactly makes your tour different from everyone else's, and also what do you want to enact in people or help people think about that's going to connect them to doing something that's going to make a change in the world.
So how does that motivate them even to get them to take that first step into the museum? I can't imagine kids are saying, yeah, instead of going out to do this, I'm going to go over to SAM and do this.
Well, I think that's an interesting question. We don't wait for people to come to us. Like, I think people always comment on, oh, you're at all these events, you're at things and stuff. I would go to those things in general, but I feel like we were talking off camera about an ecosystem. And I feel like that's really an important part of understanding this work that we do. The lines get blurred. Like, I'm volunteering at this event, I'm going to tell them about something I'm passionate about, which is my work. Our staff goes to school board meetings. They go to cultural events. And we may not have a young person involved in that, but it's our job to be a part of the audiences and the communities when and where we feel we need to be kind of engaged, we need to be where those folks are. So the best way to get to me is to actually be around me. You know what I mean? The best way to get to, say, my mom or another teenager is to have someone around them or infiltrate the group with someone that's as passionate about the idea as you are.
So if you get them young, the way it sounds like you are you able to actually sustain that lifelong relationship? Because I imagine that's what most institutions like SAM is looking for. You want to get them at a young age and keep them coming back, having memberships and whatever else moving forward, right?
Well, yes. I think it's actually fascinating. I think what's made SAM successful is that we are interested in people participating in art and culture wherever they are, as opposed to only come to SAM. And I think that that is a huge difference in our practice, that we are truly invested in creating opportunities for people to experience stuff that's going to inspire them in and through the arts, to do something, whatever they choose to do in the world, and to think differently about the world we live in, and just think a little bit more about the world we live in. And so if they come to SAM and or they go to the Henry, or they go to the Fry, or they go to the zoo, that's all great, because we know that people are participating in an ecology. I think one of the bigger things too is that we actually have thought about our program. So we have, say, for example, a version of Remix for families, and they're called Family Days and Community Days, or Community Nights Out. And then they can age out of that into our Team Night Out. And after Team Night Out, they can, which attracts like 500 to 1,000 people on any given event. And then they can age out of that, and they automatically want to come to Remix. We haven't done it on the top end yet, like
Right.
senior soiree or anything like that. But
Well, it sounds to me, I mean, it sounds like to me that you've got a lot of this engagement stuff figured out, especially when we all have these devices with us, and kids too. So when we come back, we're going to help you extend your reach and think a bit more about the challenges you are facing, given that you are competing with these devices. We'll be right back with Sandra Jackson-Dumont. We're back with Sandra Jackson-Dumont of the Seattle Art Museum. Let's see if we can apply a little bit of Four Peaks therapy to challenges that you're facing right now. You're doing these great parties, you're getting young people into the museum. What are some of the things that you're trying to solve still? I imagine that technology might have something to do with that.
mm-hmm. So one of the things that we've been thinking a lot about is how can we use technology to make the institution greener? So, as an example, get rid of more paper products. So we are trying to reduce the mailings we do, increase access to the internet, or kind of encourage people to access the internet. But at the same time, you know, we have a large population that really is interested in printed material. Mm-hmm. We also want to do that in our galleries as well.
So you're talking about when they actually come, you know, are you going to give them a map and a brochure, or are they actually going to bring their own devices and put it all there, right?
There's that, and then there's also material that we send out, because we know that we've come to terms with the fact that there is no silver bullet. And so how do we reduce, you know, our carbon footprint, you know, in terms of printed material, and increase usability for, say, elders in the museum? Do we give them devices at the museum? I think it's a myth that elders are kind of not onto the game of technology.
And it's also a myth that all young people have the devices.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
So,
so
are you opening a Pandora's box? Are you sort of saying, okay, you know, we're going to actually give you something that where you might actually want to sort of go stray off the reserve a little bit and actually look at something else as opposed to focusing? In terms of distraction, what happens when you open up that opportunity to use the devices on the premises?
Well, I think like anything, you know, we would want to curate that experience so that people are coming to the museum for something, and it's easy to get distracted. So, you know, for example, we have an app right now for our special exhibition. It's pretty directed. It's an audio guide app, and there are ancillary kind of there's video footage and all those kinds of things on there. However, we would love to expand that so that it can include more content, like, for example, this interview, you know, and maybe someone wants to sit in the lobby in between work, and instead of going to a coffee shop, they want to come and sit at SAM in the porcelain room, which we see a lot of people doing, but they're using their own devices. And so how can we actually take all the content, or a lot of the content that we have been developing, interviews that have never been published, things like that, and place them out there in the world so that people can have access to it, but in an accessible way, while at the same time not ostracizing some of our people that are interested in traditional
Yeah,
communication.
you actually do have to do both of those. And I think it's actually what you've said is actually key, that you do already own a lot of content. In fact, what's all the rage right now is something called content marketing, that Sam may be a museum and maybe about education and maybe about curating art, but it's also in its own right a media organization. And you actually have the ability to take all the content that you own currently, put it in a place that's usable, and make that your channel. And if you can own that channel and use that to continue that engagement, that's fabulous.
Yeah.
And I know I've spoken about this stuff as a distraction, but actually the opportunity is that, typically speaking, when somebody comes to the museum, the relationship ends when they leave unless they come back. But you can actually continue the relationship once they go. If they're actually using the device, they can continue to use it and have the experience with Sam 20 minutes, an hour, 3 days later after leaving the museum.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to have conversations with people about how technology can be almost like the fourth side of Sam. For example, Sam is one museum, 3 locations, but is that equipment, and is that kind of is social media the fourth platform? Is it the location where an artist can actually do an installation and people go visit that space? So really thinking of it as kind of a placemaking mechanism, which is, I think, at the core of our work. Like, how can everything we do be about this you had to be there experience? So, yeah.
Well, I think that's exactly right. I think you can't necessarily expect these days to bring people to you. You actually have to go to where they are. So by creating that fourth place, that's a really great idea, actually. And how can you actually get people to actually work with you, especially kids, to actually collaborate on that participation and that experience, you think?
I think that we would want them to play with some of the things. I think that we would want to ask them through whatever vehicle they feel is appropriate, whether it's, putting them in a room with some equipment, or just figuring out what people are interested in, and then thinking with specialists like you all about how to make that material and information or experience accessible via another kind of tool, and or make the tool dependent on connecting with a work of art, like a scavenger hunt in a museum. I mean, things that apply to the rest of the world, geotagging, all that stuff.
That's brilliant. I mean, I think that's exactly the philosophy and vision and acceptance you need to have when you're dealing with this technology. So we'll be right back as Sandra Jackson-Dumont teaches me a thing or two.
Four Peaks is made possible by generous support from Weber Shandwick.
We're at the Seattle Art Museum with Sandra Jackson-Dumont, who's going to show me how to give a tour about my favorite things. And what I really like about this, Sandra, is that you're crowdsourcing the tours. It's not just the experts who work here, but it's the people in the community who are showing other people in the community what's so great about the museum.
And in fact, it's taking it a step further than that. They are picking works of art that they relate to, that they want other people to be excited about. They are connecting them to their own stories. And so people in the community become an actual link to the works of art, or a bridge to the works of art through their own stories. And I know that you're interested in stories.
I am.
And so you today are going to pick a work of art, which it looks like you've chosen.
I have.
And you've picked it for a particular reason. And what we want you to do is actually convince me to be as engaged and interested in this work of art as you are, by telling me a story about your connection to it.
So I came into this gallery and I saw this and I was immediately drawn to this because I've spent a lot of time in the Middle East covering a lot of conflict as a television journalist, as a war reporter, and especially in the Palestinian territories. And at the time I made friends with a man whose family was from Turkey, and they had a deep, deep heritage back to the original tile makers in Turkey. And I think a lot of the art that we see in the Islamic world actually originates from that tradition that came out of Turkey and around the Mediterranean. And so, as somebody who has covered so many stories of just death and destruction and political strife, there is actually incredible beauty that comes from the deep heritage of this part of the world as well. And so I thought, well, this is incredible, and this looks like a lot of the work that comes out of there. And then you tie it to this incredible history that the Middle East has had, well beyond what we experience now. That resonates for me.
Yeah.
How did I do?
You did wonderfully, and it's not for me to judge.
Okay.
I actually can tell you that I feel like this was a successful tour of my favorite things, because I personally see this work in a completely different light.
Oh, good.
Through your lens, and I would probably tell your story to someone else. The other thing is that I didn't have anything to do with your tour. You decided on your own which work of art, you decided what you're going to talk about, and you created a place of relevance. And that is our whole goal with these tours, to create opportunities for people to connect themselves to a work of art back to the larger world. And I have to say, seeing things in person, there's no way that you can get this kind of texture. I mean, you can get close to it, but to be physically in this building and having a conversation allows you to create a moment with people, a moment where it feels like you kind of really had to be there.
I shouldn't touch it, right?
You shouldn't touch it, but you can look very closely.
Okay.
Touch with your eyes.
Sandra, you're actually giving me a new way of actually enjoying the museum, and I'm going to bring my kids.
Don't just bring your kids, bring your boys. Bring your friends.
I will. You're
bring
right.
your people.
You're right. I'm bringing my boys. All right, thanks. We're going back to the studio now, and me and Sandra, actually. Well, Sandra Jackson-Dumont, you've utterly convinced me that I actually need to bring my kids to the museum, because there's actually never too young of an age to actually come, right?
Right.
I shouldn't be scared to bring them, afraid they're going to be bored, right?
Not at all. We have kids on the caterpillar rope coming to Sam all the time.
Well, I feel actually guilty that I haven't done it yet, because I really want them to have that relationship with art, and I just love how you're engaging young people, especially to establish that relationship early on. I think it's absolutely fundamental. And also this notion of a place where people connect and have those conversations is ultimately how we should all be looking at getting people's attention and engaging. So thank you for having that vision and bringing that to us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you to the Seattle Art Museum's Sandra Jackson-Dumont. We invite you all to extend your reach by connecting with us at 4peaks.org. I'm Hanson Hossein.
Production of Four Peaks would not be possible without the generous support of our sponsors.